Don't you dare, ref. That she got the ball. Good morning, Tottenham fans. Hopefully you're all enjoying your international break. It's nice to have a bit of downtime amongst all the chaos around Tottenham Hotspur. However, the reason why we've gathered you all here today is all summer long I've heard these are Ange Postecoglou signings. Whether that's as a tool to beat him with on one of the many reasons why people think he shouldn't be in the job, or whether it's to someone like me who's had criticism, but people have said regardless, if Postecoglou wants them, we should support them. So today, we're going to review each signing made under Ange Postecoglou's tenure based on research and available public knowledge of who is behind each signing to determine which signings can be attributed directly to Postecoglou and which ones may not be his choice.
And everyone, if you can for us, smash that like button, get into the comments below. Feel free to disagree with us at any point if you feel like the research maybe doesn't match up with your opinion. But let's get straight into this one here. And we're going to start off first. I'm going to pick one at random here, Dave. So I kind of throw you off a little bit off of your flow. Manor Solomon. Let's go right in the middle there. Where does he stand? Is he an Ange signing or was he a club signing?
Well, Jack, this one for me is a club signing. The signing of Manor Solomon has Daniel Levy's fingerprints all over it. Low risk, no cost, and the potential to sell him at a high profit if things don't work out. And the fact that he's gone out on loan this season suggests to me it's rather a club signing and an opportunistic signing rather than one that has Postecoglou's fingerprints on it.
Yeah, and you would expect that Ange Postecoglou wouldn't want to get himself into a legal court battle like Shakhtar Donetsk are trying to find themselves in with Spurs, versus Daniel Levy would love to be in a legal court battle over a transfer. It's almost like a compliment to himself over his nasty sort of trade or transfer habits. But we'll move on quickly into another one, maybe more at random again here, Dave. Alejo Valise, the guy who is just recently scored a goal and was very emotional about, kind of the struggles that he's had as a footballer. Was he a club signing or an Ange signing?
Well, Alejo Valise, Jack, I've put this one down to Gabbanini, if anyone remembers him, Leonardo Gabbanini. It's well known that he had a deep appreciation of the South American market and extensive knowledge of it, which led to this signing of Alejo Valise. Tottenham pursued the Argentina international, Jack, because they believe he has the physical attributes to become a future Premier League star. And also, Ange Postecoglou on the signing, when he arrived, he acknowledged that it will take time for Valise to adapt to a new country, culture and league, and that he did advise fans not to expect him to get minutes straight off the bat, which again suggests to me Valise is a club signing, one for the future, rather than having Postecoglou stamp all over it again.
Yeah, and also just quickly, everyone, we do probably recognize that with a lot of these signings, it's not like Ange has just thrown these players completely out of the blue, right? He does have that famous phone call with them. He does also try to get, some sort of picture of their mental psyche, what they are sort of mentality-wise, all that sort of stuff. And we do recognize that Ange probably has some input on it, but let's be honest, I think a lot of these people that we will bring up here might have, the initial research and probably the majority of the work maybe done on the club side. And I think that is especially the case when it was with the Alejo Valise. But now, Dave, onto a signing that you and I have been critical of in the past. We like him as a person, but maybe his time here at Spurs has been divisive amongst Spurs fans. Brennan Johnson, what are your thoughts on him? Is he a club signing and signing?
Now, when it comes to Brennan Johnson, Jack, I will concede this one for me is an Ange Postecoglou player. I know that Ange Postecoglou is a huge fan of the player, but it's also understood that Postecoglou made Johnson one of his top priorities in the remaining days of the summer transfer window where we sold Harry Kane, and that he saw him as an ideal pacey winger, that he will come in here and suit his system ideally down to the ground, which likely probably explains why Ange Postecoglou keeps selecting him despite, not many great performances. So for me, this one is an Ange Postecoglou sign, and from my research, it tells me he's behind this.
If Johan Lange might have been at the club at the time, which he wasn't, it was still actually Gabbanini and sort of the remnants of the Paratici
Well,
era.
they had just left before that, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of think, that was he was signed in the year Mickey Van de Ven was. He was signed in the year Vicario was, Brendan Johnson. And so I think, the Johan Lange, kind of era wasn't really in yet. So I would have maybe thought it could have been a Johan Lange because he's, in love with the homegrown market. But that wasn't the case, at the time. So it probably was maybe more Ange input. And he does love pace, as you said just earlier, when it comes to some of his signings. Maybe on to another speedy signing, Speedo Teamy Weenie, Dave, Timo Werner. Was he an Ange signing? Was he a club signing? This will really break people's hearts.
Look, again, doesn't make great reading for Ange Postecoglou, but again, I concede this is indeed an Ange Postecoglou signing, Jack. He did want Werner at Celtic. That's common knowledge after he was impressed by him during the match between Celtic and RB Leipzig. Also, towards the end of last season, when he was asked about making Timo Werner permanent, he said, I think he's been a great signing. He's been a really important part of our structure, and I believe he can also improve. Postecoglou also played a key role in this move due to videos that you've seen, some data analysis that he's also trying to apply to his own system. It is worth noting that Johan Lang also backed this one up. He said that the stats match what they're looking for. So this one I'm going to put on Postecoglou.
Now, it's an Italian stallion, the guy that all of a sudden has come under a bit of criticism, maybe rightfully so, because he hasn't played too well in the second season. But in the first season, he was practically a revelation for us Spurs fans. Our new goalkeeper, Guglielmo Vicario, Dave. Thoughts on him as an Ange signing or as a club signing?
Well, I think Spurs were very transparent at the time that Guglielmo Vicario was identified through their data-driven scouting model, indicating that this decision came from the club rather than Ange Postecoglou. Gabbiadini, alongside Paratici, agreed before Paratici's departure that Empoli goalkeeper would be an ideal fit for Tottenham. And also, when Gabbiadini was asked about Vicario's acquisition, he did say signing him was a team decision, and it's clear that last season our targets were different because we had a different coach. But when the scouting department leads the process, the names will be different, which again shows, and he's saying it himself, that's off the data-driven scouting model.
You'd like to think that Vicario would have been one of the most data-driven, led type of signings that we've made in some time now. He came completely out of nowhere. He had a brilliant season at Empoli, but he kind of only just came onto the scene, really, just in general, I think, around Europe. And so they must have done a lot of scouting on him, either in the stats, but also, in person to try to see if he really could make that step up to Tottenham Hotspur. It's yet to be seen whether he'll be able to do it for a long tenure, but I think he had a brilliant first season at Spurs, and he does technically meet a lot of the requirements of what Ange wants to do or what he wants from his goalkeepers. And that clearly came from a lot of data-led and driven research, like you said earlier. And I think that must mean that it must have been more of a club signing. Sadly, Ange Postecoglou isn't on FBref all the time, like myself, doing all the research for some of these goalkeepers. But Dave, onto someone that also kind of to a degree came out of nowhere, but has been definitely a revelation, has probably the next world-class center back at Tottenham Hotspur, Mickey van de Ven.
Well, Jack, there's actually numerous articles out there referencing an interview with Gabbiadini, which he gave after leaving Tottenham, where he takes credit for the signing of Mickey van de Ven. Wow. Gabbiadini explained that while others had concerns about Van de Ven's price, age, and the fact that he wasn't playing for Holland, he convinced Spurs to sign him, believing in that he would go on to achieve great things. He also expressed pride in advocating for signings that weren't the most obvious choices, indicating that this was another club-driven data acquisition based on the scouting department's recommendation rather than a decision made by Ange Postecoglou. Postecoglou's only involvement in a lot of these signings, like you alluded to, is just having that phone call with them to make sure they're coming to Tottenham for the right reason. And if they're not, he can maybe relay that back to the transfer team and say, look, maybe give this one a miss. But that's the only real involvement, especially last window, bar the Brennan Johnson one, that Ange Postecoglou had in that window. The rest of it was Gabbiadini and Paratici.
We're very grateful for our Mickey. Dave, this one is also a tricky one for me because Ange Postecoglou has put his arm around him numerous times. He's shown that he is a big fan of his, but also he's been, to a degree, kind of harsh on him where he's pulled him off at halftime. He's been, frustrated with him. It's been a mixed bag, with this guy. Maddison matters. Ange seemed to really like him. He did that phone call with him, and Maddison has spoke about that phone call numerous times. Is Maddison an Ange signing? Is he a club signing?
No, he's not an Ange Postecoglou sign. I won't have anyone tell me he is, purely for the fact that Tottenham have been tracking Maddison since his teenage years at Coventry City. And when Leicester eventually got relegated, Maddison only had 1 year left on his contract, which became a very opportune time for Tottenham to be able to act and finally secure a guy at a reduced price that they've been tracking since his teenage years and have made no secret about their interest, even when he was at Norwich as well. And also, according to an article that The Athletic put out, the transfer was driven by the club rather than specifically Ange Postecoglou's choice. Postecoglou's only direct involvement in this, like you said, Jack, was his phone call to Maddison to again make sure he was coming to Tottenham for the right reasons and not just looking to get himself back into the Premier League. So given Tottenham's long outstanding interest in Maddison, it can only go down as a club signing.
Now on to maybe again someone that you'd probably think is more a club signing in this situation, just because he's only played so much football in general at the top level. Ashley Phillips, very talented, but hasn't been given too many opportunities yet. Club signing and signing.
This one again, Jack, is a club signing. Spurs had concrete interest in Ashley Phillips, if anyone remembers, this summer before Conte got sacked. And the deal fell through because Blackburn kept on changing the terms of the deal. But when Postecoglou arrived, Tottenham did revisit it that summer. But they brought him in because there was a 2 million release clause that was activated in his contract last summer that Tottenham could activate. And that's why they brought him in. But because, again, they tried to pursue him before Postecoglou arrived, it's a club signing.
Sticking with center backs, Dave, the big dragon, the Radu. He's got a lovely head of hair. He's got, the probably the best man bun jeans that we've had since Gareth Bale at the club. What do you make of the dragon? Do you think he was an Ange signing, a club signing? He's also famous for that phone call that brought him here instead of Bayern Munich. But what do you make of Radu Dragusin?
This one's a bit hard to determine, Jack, so I'm actually going to give you final sort of decision off this based on the information I'm just going to provide you with. Now, Paratici, of course, had a long-standing relationship with Radu Dragusin and was the first one who initially actually put him on Tottenham's radar onto the shortlist and for someone to keep an eye on and track over the future. Now, Spurs were desperate for centre-back cover last January, if most people remember. And it was actually Johan Lang and Rob McKenzie who followed it up by going out and scouting him and watching a couple of the Genoa games before bringing him in here. But Postecoglou also, due to my research, Football London, I think, put it out there based on Ali Gold. Postecoglou also gave the green light for this deal to happen. But again, I think that green light happened after the phone call with Radu Dragusin. So it's up to you who you want to attribute this one to.
I think the power of the phone call does go a very long way with Postecoglou. And if he heard rumorings or, any murmurs that we could be going after this guy, I wonder if he then, kind of did his own kind of background research, watched maybe a few of the game footage of him, and then maybe spoke to the family because he does have a strong family background, strong football background. And maybe Ange thought, you know what, this is the guy for me. And again, in similar sort of vein to some of the other signings, Radu Dragusin, very athletic, not as pacey as Van de Ven, but I do think is, faster than he looks. And I wonder if he's just one of those guys that Ange just immediately liked the look of. So I'm actually going to say Radu might have been an Ange signing, and then kind of also, like you said, some background Paratici kind of roots as well to it. But then, Dave, maybe just finally sticking with the last of our center back options here, Luka Vuskovic. Now, I'd like to think that Ange is a nerd like myself, and he's spending time off in Croatia, scouting the young itches of the world. But, maybe that's not the case. He might have better things to do with his time.
Vuskovic, of course, he was signed and announced 2 years before his arrival, which will be this summer. And the deal was also completed outside of the transfer window. And I think this further highlights to me that it's not a signing that Ange Postecoglou would have recommended for the club to make, although Ange Postecoglou, I believe, really has an extensive nerd knowledge of footballers around the world and that. But this one, I think, again, is club-driven decision, Jack, identified as a long-term investment for the future.
Now, I wish that he was, maybe scouting the beaches of Croatia like I would be for these young Croatian talents. But sadly, like I said, I think he has too much time on his hands to not try that sort of thing. Archie Gray, Dave, club signing and signing, one for the future, but he seems to like him.
He seems to like him, Jack. But again, the reason why I say this one is a club signing, it's well known that Tottenham had a long outstanding interest in Archie Gray. And it was actually, again, The Athletic, when Archie Gray signed for Tottenham, that had that juicy bit of information in the article that basically stated that before he signed his first professional contract with Leeds, Tottenham were trying to lure him to the club. So that was way before Ange Postecoglou was even on Tottenham's radar. So again, club signing.
Odegaard, then, the recent French winger, seems like someone that, again, must have been more data approach than maybe, kind of personally selected by the manager, but I could be wrong.
Well, Jack, for me, this one was hard to pinpoint down exactly who was behind this signing. But when you look at it from the aesthetics, from the outside, you look at the Odegaard one. Tottenham clearly had other targets that they were trying to pursue all summer long. For one reason or another, whether it was due to price or they had competing options, it didn't happen. And there was a famous quote from Postecoglou just before the Odegaard signing, if anyone takes themselves back to it, where he said, I've had phone calls with players where it almost feels like I have to convince them to join Tottenham because they have other options on the table, and that's not what I'm about. So it's clear that Tottenham had to pivot, and I presume they pivot to the data-led scouting model. And this is why they brought in Odegaard.
Well, next then, Dave, on to maybe someone like, Odegaard, where he's one for the future, but he has a lot of attributes that would suit Ange Paul. maybe Youngman Hook. This seems, again, kind of more of a Daniel Levy signing, but also maybe a bit of a data-led kind of driven signing at the same time.
100%. Look, there's no secret at Tottenham that Son is getting on, right? And he's been a massive part not only to Tottenham Hotspur on the football pitch, but it's also important to acknowledge the revenue that he brings with him. Tottenham increasingly year in, year out post record-breaking revenues, and the South Korean fan base that comes with Son is a huge part of that. And I've no doubt that the scattered data-driven model was specifically put out there to that region to find a player to be able to continue on that revenue after Son retires at Tottenham Hotspur. So for me, I'm going to go club signing.
Looking forward to his impact in January. Hopefully, if he can make one. The big Dom, Solanke, I must admit, this is one I was very giddy about, very excited about, despite maybe some doubts over the transfer and whether he will work out. I hope that he does. Mr. Solanke, Dave, was he Ange's #1 striker target? Do you think this is one that Ange maybe made a big push for, or was this also maybe more of a data-led approach?
Well, look, I'm just going off what Ange Postecoglou has put out there. To be honest, I don't think this one needs to be that-led approach. I think everyone was well aware of the player. And Postecoglou has been very strong when he was asked about Solanke that this is his signing. He outlined many reasons why, due to, his relentless press and various other things that he can provide Tottenham Hotspur. So for this one goes towards Postecoglou.
Well, the big Dom looks like me and Ange have a big liking in the big Dom. Now, Dave, Lucas Bergvall, the Swedish wonder kid. Is this someone that was a data-led scouting, or is there also some Ange influence in this one?
No, this one is purely down to Johan Lang, Jack. So this will be, again, a club signing. It was widely reported that Johan Lang played a crucial role in making this deal happen. We actually should thank Fabrizio Romano for this one, because he's the one that blew it open for Tottenham to come in. It was Deco at Barcelona tried to keep this one a huge secret, but Fabrizio Romano got hold of it, put it out there. Johan Lang learned about it and used his connections to be able to get in contact with Bergvall and lure him to come around and look at Tottenham, and ultimately helped get that signing over the line, because he promised them he would be in the first team squad. So this one is the club written all over it again.
He seems to have a strong mentality as well, which, the Ange is definitely a big fan of, but probably, like you said, more maybe led by someone like Johan Lange. We can probably throw these two in together, Kulusevski as well as Pedro Porro. The reason we have them in here, though, Dave, is because they technically were on those kind of loan with option to buy, or kind of like obligation to buy type of signings, and especially in the case of Pedro Porro. But do you think it was Ange or the club that went ahead and, triggered the big money that, these two have come in for? Because Kulusevski eventually did come in for some pretty big money. Same thing with Pedro Porro.
Unfortunately, on this one, Ange Postecoglou had no say whatsoever. These were brought in before Postecoglou even arrived at Spurs, and they were brought in on loans with obligation to buy, which meant Tottenham had to buy them. So, Postecoglou has no say in them two whatsoever.
Well, there you are, everybody. Those are all of our selections. It looks like we have about 4 Ange signings, and the rest of them are all club signings. Now, one thing I'll add to this is I think this is actually a fair representation of kind of how the modern game is headed. Nowadays, I don't think managers have as much control over the transfers as what they used to. Mostly that's because managers don't last as long as what they used to. So what's the point in giving a manager every single choice, and every single power in a decision over a transfer, when they might not actually live up to their hype, or they might not actually live up to the reputation that they're supposed to have, or it just doesn't simply work out for them at the club that they end up managing. And so you don't want to just have a bunch of mixes and matches of different types of, players that are all from previous regimes or previous managers. I think where clubs are headed now is they want to try to find similar types of players with similar type of approach and research, and have that suit to a degree what the manager might want in a player, but it won't always be exactly who the manager specifically identified.
No, 100%, Jack. I think you're absolutely great conclusion. Every manager I think the conclusion of this, every manager that walks into Tottenham might get a couple of signings initially to, try and help implement their system. But a lot of the signings made around that, and especially with this squad, have more been club signings rather than the management signings. And why I say that, Jack, is Johan Lang done a brilliant interview as well. And I've pulled this from the interview where he says, this is not Ange and myself. This is a club strategy. This is a club alignment, and Ange and I have been brought in different roles to execute this, which there shows to me the club have the style of philosophy that they want to play going forward. They've brought in the data-led scouting department to able to execute that, and hopefully not have as many misses as they have had in the market before. And because of all the misses they've had before, where they've maybe trusted managers and director of football solely and the amount of money they've missed out on, they have pivoted to this data-led scouting model, which when you look at Brighton and Brentford, they don't really tend to miss too much. They don't really lose so much money on a lot of the signings that they make. In fact, they make a lot of money off the signings that they made. And for me, I don't actually think a lot of this transfer business or these signings come down to, do we trust Postecoglou because these are his signings or they're not? It actually really comes down to, do you trust the club's vision and what they're trying to do here, and basically with their style of play and matching that up with the data-led scouting to be able to emphasize it, and then you're just bringing in managers to work with it rather than actually bringing in a manager and making all the signings for him. And I think it's very important to take this on board, because that's the old way management used to be, when they were actually called managers and were signing contracts that stated they were a manager. They managed a lot more than just the squad. They had a lot of say in terms of incomings, outgoings. Whereas now it's a lot different. Managers don't really have a say, and especially at Tottenham, Ange Postecoglou is a head coach, which means he's responsible for the day-to-day running of the squad. But outside of that, he actually doesn't have too much input. And I think amongst the chaos right now, it's very important to understand this. And again, this is why I'm willing to give Postecoglou time to get this right, time to build this, because this is what this approach basically needs, Jack.
Yeah, the recruitment models have become in the modern era almost as important as the manager themselves. And I think that's something we just continue to come to grips with as general football fans. But everybody, if you like this video, feel free to like it, but also as well, do thank Dave, another version of Professor Harris, on this recording. He did a lot of research ahead of this video, and also get into the comments below if at any point you disagreed with any of our selections or the research done on this one. And we'll see you next time. Come on, you Spurs. In the Big Ange we trust. Enjoy your international break.